introduce myself first. My name is John Chen. I'm so glad that I see so many people here with us sharing what Dr. Taylor has to present after I finish my talk. And I would like to say a few things first before we get into the real business. The first thing is I will be speaking on behalf of Whole Brain Production Limited. For every one of us there, to welcome everybody first for being here. And we are very excited about this whole seminar, about the technology that Dr. Alton Taylor will be bringing us and explaining in detail later on. And in order to cut everything, all those formality and stuff like that short, so I will just make it real quick so not to waste too much of your time. The first thing I would like to mention is that is everybody who are using the headphone or the receiver get the whole, the piece of the receiver and the headphone, are they working all right there? I mean, is that everybody receiving? 係咪每一個人用嘅 headphone 同埋 receiver 都 OK？ 唔該 check 一 check。如果唔 OK 嘅話，可唔可以舉手俾我睇睇 ？I guess that is working terrifically. So the next point is that if you would be kind enough to leave your headphone and receiver before you leave this room, we will greatly appreciate that because we need to save all of them for the translation people to get them together so they can use it next time. And another thing is that we have a surprise gift from Dr. Alton Taylor to all those people who take this last time, but the seminar was postponed, and all those people who are entitled to the free gift, please notice that the shipment has not arrived yet. They are a bunch of very powerful books written by Dr. Taylor, and each one of you will get each book. So we would register your name somewhere in our list so that by the time we receive the shipment, we will notice you as soon as we can. And we're going to have two breaks. One is, maybe about 45 minutes after Dr. Alton Taylor has started. Then the first break will take place, and that will last for maybe 10 minutes so that we can go up and stretch our legs, relax a little bit. And then the second break will take place around 12:30, somewhere. At that time, you are more than welcome, to go and help yourself with the snacks, drinks, and foods we have prepared for you. Those are the few points that I would like to mention. And the last thing is that we would appreciate greatly also if you would like to fill in the personal data, the form that is attached to the handout. We would like to network with every one of you so that next time if Dr. Taylor has anything good, we will be able to notice you in the first place. So if you will be kind enough to do that, it will be very great. And that's all that I need to say right now. And let me not waste too much of your time. And please, Dr. Alton Taylor, we are very happy.
First, I owe some of you an apology because we were going to do this 45 days or so ago, and I got called back to the United States. So I'm sorry that it was delayed, but I am glad that you were able to come out today. Second, I want to thank Mr. Chan and his entire team, Whole Brain Productions, for the opportunity to be here and speak with you today. By way of a little bit of a background as to what you can expect and where we're going to go, I saw these posters that Whole Brain made. They're a very nice poster, and I had the Chinese version of it translated to me yesterday, and there were a couple of things in there that I didn't know we were going to talk about. But we're going to make some adjustments, and we will be talking about those things. But what I really want to talk to you about, more importantly than anything else, is a condition that I see everywhere that I go. And that condition, whether it's in a prison system a hospice center for terminally ill, speaking to Fortune 500 executives, talking to young people who are at risk for dropout in the school system, speaks to something we call self-alienation, or something we might address more specifically as low self-esteem. It speaks to a world that we live in where we have computers, many of us very fancy automobiles, nice homes, swimming pools, maybe we have relationships. We generally have the technology and all the toys that each of us as children wanted to grow up and have. But in spite of all that, there seems to be in many people a sense of emptiness, a sense of a lack of wholeness or completeness, a lack of self-identity, and the absence of happiness. So I hope that much of what we talk about today will propose some alternatives. And whether or not you ever engage in the use of the technologies that we'll discuss, these alternatives may empower you to experience more quality, more richness, more happiness in your own personal life. Ostensibly, we're going to talk about subliminal communication and technologies that empower one by changing the way a person thinks. If we stop and think about that for a moment, in America we look at self-talk, the language that I speak to myself every morning or throughout the day. The language that I had when I was outside here is, you know, there are a lot of people in there and they're kind of imposing, and I don't know, maybe it'd be a good day to go golfing. Let's get out of here. But then that deals with only my personal fears, that perhaps I'll get up in front of you and my zipper won't be up, or some such thing of that nature. Each of us has a flow or stream of consciousness, as William James says, that reflects what we really think about ourselves. This stream of consciousness we call self-talk. When someone on the outside says to you, you're a good person, don't worry about it, everything will be okay, normally there is some inner talk that says, well, I hope they're right, but I'm not sure they are. I've never done this before, or I'm afraid I can't, or what if this worst possible scenario occurs? And it's this kind of self-talk that delimits the human condition, that stops the person from experiencing everything they might ever want to experience. Once upon a time I was asked in a television show by a rather, well, he was a nice moderator, but he was somewhat hostile about the subject. Well, why is it then we can't just do something like get an audible tape, we'll record some affirmations on it for ourselves, there'll be all powerful positive statements, or we'll read Norman Vincent Peale's book, The Power of Positive Thinking, and that will change our mind. Why is it that we don't do that? I remember that because spontaneously I asked him, as I will ask you now, is there anything in your life that you would like that you don't have? Is there anything that you would like to feel good about that you don't feel good about? See, if you stop and think about the human condition, we all agree that if a person believes they have the power and the ability to do something, then they can do it. But if they don't believe they have the power and the ability to do it, they never will do it. If our self-talk addresses us in a negative way, if it speaks to us essentially by telling us that we don't have the power or the ability, or proposes fears that limit our ability to perform, then we never will experience that happiness, that joy, that opportunity. Years ago, I was a practicing criminologist in Utah. And one of the things that the agency that I owned and operated did was lie detection tests. As a lie detection examiner, one of my concerns was what we call inconclusive. That's just simply an honest person would come in to take a lie detection test, and there would be a lot of situational stress. And due to this situational stress, they would exaggerate the chart reading, and I might be inclined to call them deceptive. If not, they would be in a borderline area where we had to look at them and say it's inconclusive. I can't tell you they're telling the truth, and I can't tell you that they're lying. On the other hand, we would have dishonest people who had studied countermeasures, who knew how to manipulate their charts somewhat, and they too would fall in this inconclusive category. About 20% of the people that we tested fell in inconclusive. I heard about a technology. It's called subliminal information processing. And allegedly, this technology has been used by Los Angeles Police Department in a terrorist abduction scene scenario where they had an audio program created that had subliminal messages on it. Now, subliminal message is a message that you don't register or report as being present. And these messages allegedly were designed to create dysfunctions in the pancreas, the liver, and give rise to an individual having diarrhea, dehydrating, and so forth. Now, the whole idea was based on how abductions work. A terrorist abduction normally has 14 hours of telephone negotiation in it. So Los Angeles PD has theorized what they would do is play this tape in the background, the sound of air conditioning or a heater, masked gray sound, and at some point they would suggest to the terrorists that they were in a highly infected area where they experienced any of these symptoms. They tested this program on the cadets at the Los Angeles Police Academy, and reportedly, after 3 days, suspended the test because they were dehydrating the cadets. That intrigued me. I attempted to verify the story. I was never able to either verify it or have someone in a responsible position deny it. But nevertheless, I thought, all right, if a message out of awareness could cause something of that nature, could we use a message out of awareness to ameliorate or alleviate the difficulties that we have that we call situational stress with someone that comes in to take a lie detection test and intends to tell you the truth? And could we at the same time exaggerate physiological responses to someone intends to tell me a lie? Well, in order to answer that question, I had to find out what subliminal was. In order to investigate subliminal, at that time, I felt that the best thing that I could probably do was just simply write everybody that made a so-called subliminal tape or knew anything about subliminal tape and tell them what it was that I had in mind and ask them how they did it and what they did and so on and so forth. Well, I did that, but I didn't get much back. And when I talked to manufacturers, it was trade secret. They really couldn't or wouldn't tell me what they did. Well, I got some tapes, and I played with them in my own laboratory, and I wasn't able to find any messages on them. So I got back in touch with some of these people, and I started talking to them about what a subliminal property is. And they said, well, listen, if you could ever hear anything on it, it wouldn't really be subliminal, so we have to hide it so well that it's not there. And we'll come back to this point in a moment, because it became a central issue in a controversy that heated up a couple of years ago in the United States regarding subliminal information processing. But okay, I could see very quickly that there wasn't a wheel I could go copy that at least anyone would tell me something about. I was going to have to reinvent it. That meant I had to understand somewhat of the theoretical underpinning as to how we can process information that I'm not aware is there. Now, at that point in time, I was definitely a devil's advocate. It's a great idea, but I don't believe this stuff works.
how would it be possible for the mind to process information that the mind was not aware of? I started in the literature, and I don't want to turn this into a course in cognitive psychology, but I started in the literature by looking at perceptual defense mechanisms, perceptual processes. We have a common belief in the world, at least in the Western world, that the eye and the mind is a camera, that it just takes pictures of the world out there, and what we see inside here is really what's out there. Well, in cognitive psychology, we know that's not true. In cognitive psychology, we understand that the mind has perceptual processes that give rise to literally generating or creating information that is not there. For those of you that are English speaking, if you look at that, I'm sure you'll say, that spells the cat. We call this context information processing. But if you notice, this H and this A are not H's or A's at all, to see that what the mind has done is looked at that and said, the cat, you've assumed you have an H and an A, it has confabulated a reality that doesn't exist. We call this the top-down model of perception or cognitive work, because what you perceive, in a sense, becomes a process of conditioning. Here's another example. If you look at that, you'll see it says Paris in the spring, correct? Well, for those adroit English-speaking one, it doesn't at all. Or most, they'll read this Paris in the spring. But if you look, it says Paris in the spring. Now, when we use this type of tool in psychology, we find that over 90% of the Western world will fail to see the double dot. And even when we ask them to see the double dot, that is, we'll say to them, there's something wrong with this, take a look at it and tell us what it is, they'll still be unable to see the double dot. We tend, not just with words, but with our universe, to fill in blanks. We expect again to see something, we see them in relationships, and so our relationships in our mind are telling us this is what the real world is like. You can clearly see, let's straighten that out, you can clearly see which of those lines are the longest, can you not? And almost everyone in this room would say the top one is longer than the bottom one. And the fact is that's not true. They're identically the same size. But because of the slope, this one approximates the edge more closely than this one. We perceive in edges, and as a result, we tend to say this line is longer than this line, when indeed it's not. A more interesting form of this type of perceptual process, and what we're attempting to do here is just show you the mind is not a camera. What we think we see is indeed not all there is. What we think we hear is much less than what's present. Is this illusion right here? If you look at the illusion, you'll notice invisible white lines appear. And yet, in this one, these same white lines become contours. Now, there really are no white lines at all. They're precisely the same images, but this introduction of geometry gives rise to the mind filling in an edge. And this edge takes an elliptical form, where this edge takes a straight form. But there is no edge there at all. Still, nevertheless, 99% of the people that will look at that will see the white lines. Do you see the white lines? Now, when we look at context theory, we can go even further. We have some elaborate tests, like the Rorschach test. Here's one of my favorite ones that will show you precisely what Now this is a scattering of dots. But if you look at this scattering of dots, and you think of a Dalmatian dog, you see a dog collar here? You see an ear, the head down, the body torso? Do you see the dog? Almost 100% of the people, when shown this random scattering of dots, said, oh, there's a Dalmatian dog. There's no dog there at all. The mind is seeing a visual object and constructing a mental reality, interpreting the outside universe as being a picture of a dog, when indeed that's not what this is at all. Another good example of this perceptual limitation, or perceptual habit, if you will, is present here. This is a photograph. Photograph shows clearly some shadows being cast by a tree, but I'll bet almost everybody here saw this big, blurring, alarming spider on her shoulder. Now, it's really just the shadows from the tree. But once you see the spider, even your interpretation of her facial features changes. If you look at her now, she looks like she's alarmed, like she's seen the spider. But until you see that alarm on her face, she looks as though she's just looking away. In other words, the alarm on her face is interpreted in your mind and only becomes alarm when you recognize the presence of the spider. If you don't recognize the presence of the spider, you will interpret her facial features and expression in an entirely different way. The interesting thing about this perceptual process is energy is perception. That is, it takes a certain amount of mental energy to recognize anything. Right this minute while I'm talking, there are a lot of other stimuli in this room. Some of you may be intaking that stimuli. Some of you aren't. Wherever you give your attention, that's where your focused energy is returned. Or in other words, what you become aware of is what you give your attention to. If you look at this, you'll notice that here is a man laughing, mouth open, and here is a man that's rather smug, mouth closed. And so there are faces here, faces here, faces here, and faces here. Can you all see that? Oh, but let's look at it differently. Because there really aren't faces there. You see this collection of beautiful goblets? There are 6 goblets. Do you all see the goblets? Now, here's a challenge for you. Since attention is energy, let's see if we can divide it. See both the faces and the goblets at the same time. We almost have a physical impossibility. If we see the faces, we don't see the goblets faced on the edges. If we see the goblets, we don't see the faces. The nature of perception is in alternatives and in edges. In cognitive psychology, we understand that what a person thinks they see is specifically relevant to the way they interpret their world, what their choices, what they'll do with their lives. We show a picture like this to someone, and if we have a depressed person, they see the witch. But if we have a cheerful person, they see a beautiful young girl. Here's her eyelashes. This is the contour of her face. This is her ear. And of course, this is the hair. But if I change my look just a little bit, I have a contorted, elongated chin witch. Do y'all see the witch? You don't see the witch over here? Look at this as an eye. The front of the hair, the face of the chin. Now do you see the witch? So in other words, I can take a simple picture, and I'm going to look at that picture and tell me, what is this a picture of? And if you say a witch, it tends to express to us that You're depressed, or you expect the worst in the world. And what you see in the world is fearful and the worst. If you say to me, well, I see a beautiful young girl, well, it tends to tell me that you're more optimistic, that you feel good about your life. Since our perceptual processes are based on how we interpret the world, not the mind as a camera, not as a picture-taking mechanism imprinting the brain with a reality that we think is really out there, but indeed with a reality in here, interpreting a picture out there and telling us back in here what it is. I question, would it be possible to do the same thing with an audio illusion? This is indeed a visual illusion. Well, what exactly would an audio illusion be like? Well, at this point in my research, and again, remember, I'm just thinking about, I want to develop a tape, and I want to use this tape in a lie detection scenario. It's going to be a subliminal tape, and the subliminal tape is going to cause people to be able to laugh if they're telling me the truth. It's going to cause those people to have exaggerated physiological responses if they're lying to me. All of this perceptual process information is particularly interesting, but how did it relate to the audio domain? What could I possibly do in the audio domain? So at that point I decided, well, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pack up every tape that I can find, every subliminal program there is, and I'm going to ship them off to audio forensic laboratories in California. Now that's a special laboratory that does a lot of work for the U.S. government and other agencies. And the whole nature of this laboratory is this dedicated equipment designed to recover the tiniest fraction of a voice. That is, a lot of times in the field, one's wired for sound, and just as the incriminating statement comes, a jackhammer takes off, a garbage truck comes by. So you can't hear it on tape. You need to be able to play that tape to a jury. So everybody sends this audio forensic, and audio forensic uses parametric analyzers, sonographs, and a number of sophisticated pieces of equipment to separate bandwidth and isolate voice patterns and reproduce what's on the tape. So I shipped them all these tapes. As soon as they told me which tape I could rely upon, well, then I'd get a hold of that company in theory, and I'd have that company assist me in what I wanted to do. The problem was Anthony Pellicano, who's the owner of Audio Forensic, called me on the phone and said, I can't find anything on this tape. So I called these subliminal manufacturers back on the telephone. By now they all knew who Dr. Taylor was. He's that guy that's always on the phone with these weird questions. And I said, hey, I shipped this all out. We used parametric analyzers, we used sonograms, we used sophisticated forms of audio analysis, including audio spectrograph, and we can't find a voice on it. I said, that's not a problem. You're not supposed to. If you find a voice on it, it's not subliminal. They said, look, let us tell you what we do. I said, okay, I'll take very careful notes. They said, what we do is we put the words in down here. And then we put ocean waves over the top of those words. Now, ocean waves are what we call white sound. So this is really very, very thick if you look at it on an audio chart. It's not like music, sine wave, square wave, etc. This is thick, full spectrum sound. And they say, we put this here, and we put this here. Okay, good. Now, sometimes I like to pretend to be a scientist. We all play games. Some of us are famous. Some of us are lawyers. Some of us are physicists. Scientists, that's my game sometimes. Scientists look at something like this, and there's a little more information I'd have to have in order to be able to run a study. So I said, now listen, guys, what I'd like to know is precisely what's the dB difference between here and here. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, I want to know, the decibel to 50. 50 dB of sound difference between the top of the wave and the bottom of the word. Okay? Okay, that's really good. Except that the best limitation we have, theoretically, the dynamic power on the best ghetto blaster you can buy is 40 dB. In other words, if you turn the volume up all the way, you're going to get 40 decibels of sound. How come we have 50 dB below this? One of these manufacturers a couple of years ago, what we're talking about here goes back over 10 years, but one of these manufacturers a couple of years ago sent me a doctoral dissertation which was done in California by a psychologist, where she had created some subliminal tapes and taken them to LAPD's cadet academy. One was designed to increase motor skills as a test to see on the shooting range, shooting ability. The other was designed to increase learning skills as a test to a particular law course. They sent me the study to take a look at because the study indicated there was no efficacy. Zero did. It was placebo, it was quite music, there was no difference in the group. And I looked at this study because I talked to this manufacturer about this problem 6-7 years ago. And in the back, in the appendix, was a notarized statement by the sound engineer. We mixed the words in 50 dB below the primary carrier. We repeat to you again. A whisper 3 blocks away is not a subliminal stimuli. When they mixed this in a 50 dB differential, it was not an illusion, it just simply wasn't there. It was down in the tape pit. You couldn't possibly get it out of a player. Now recently, in America, we've had a couple of studies run, and I'll tell you about them in a minute in more detail. But one of the men that conducted this study was a marketing student. His name was Steinberg. And Mr. Steinberg, now Dr. Steinberg, decided that what he wanted to do was get some commercial tapes out in the marketplace and get 4 or 5. He would conduct a study to determine what the influence of the labels were on the expectation factors of an individual. So he got tapes on memory and he got tapes on things. And the first thing he did was send him over to Dr. Paul or Miracle. And Miracle looked at him with a sonogram and said, there are no words here, so we're sure they're subliminal. Then he conducted his study. The result of the study said there was no difference between the domains of memory and esteem or the placebo group that was involved. When I spoke to him on the phone, the study was being published as though 4 psychologists had done this study, not a marketing student had done this study. When I spoke to him on the phone, I said, are you aware that these different companies use different PV ratios? What do you mean? What's PV? See, the scientist said, in order for me to conduct a study or to replicate a study, I have to have some very precise information. If I were a chemist and I read that argon gas has been pressurized to 10 atmospheres and 50 volts or 5,000 volts of electricity has been introduced in the vacuum, I wouldn't take a fishbowl, catch a little air, hang a flashlight battery in it, and say, I replicated the study and I had different results. But that's what was happening in the subliminal industry. That's what was happening in America with a lot of companies. And how well they had. Well, for me, that was good. Because if they had the answers, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. I'd still be wrapping people up in pneumo belts and giving them life tests and tests. But all right, what I did at that point was say, how is it possible for me to present audio information? Let's just forget what these folks do and start from scratch. How is it possible for me to present audio information that I know is there, that at the same time goes unrecognized, unreported? Well, what I did for my first study was simply bed a stream down, and the stream was down for 90 seconds. So you listened to water sounds for 90 seconds. Then music came in, and that music went for 90 seconds. 180 seconds later, I put words on top of the screen. On top of the screen. I wanted to see if we'd have the same context illusion in an audio domain that we do in a visual domain. In other words, the person would listen to this, first 90 seconds, they'd say, I don't hear any words. I just hear water. Then the music would join with it, and say, I don't hear any words. I hear music. Well, it's a nice sound. The water's gone soft and the music's there. And as soon as they have chosen what they are perceiving, they have invested their energy and they fail to hear the words. That was my theory. Did it work? Absolutely. No one reported the words. They failed to report that they were present. And yet, I knew that the words were there because the words were on top of the stream. The stream and the words were mixed together first, then the music was added. All right. Using that simple, crude technology, which some call unsubliminal, and that's okay, we'll discuss that too. I took this technology and said, all right, now, this is how I'll make a subliminal message, because I know that the words are there. But what will I say? What is it that I'm going to tell these people in this lie detection phase? I mean, I suppose I can tell them, you're going to have a heart attack and die if you don't tell me the truth. But my conscience wouldn't let me do that. So I had to tell them something. What would I tell them? Well, I looked at a lot of theories. I read all of the literature. I studied a man by the name of Lloyd Silverman of New York State and all of the work that he had done. He was doing a lot of work in subliminal at that time. And basically, Lloyd had found that using a message that he believed was a message due, or had its power due, to the Oedipus complex, he was able to ameliorate schizophrenic pathology. That message was Mommy and I are one. Delivering that message, and that message alone, Lloyd was successful at ameliorating schizophrenic pathology. See, what he theorized is that the schizophrenic divided himself in personality states because, according to Freud, he had a secret desire to have sex with his mother. And in order to repress that desire or drive, he separated himself and created two personalities. So Lloyd felt if I give him a message, Mommy and I are one, I'll have a merging, a symbiotic merging. And it should ameliorate, lower schizophrenic pathology, schizophrenic symptoms. And it did indeed do that. Well, Lloyd said, I wonder how much good this would do with everybody. So they conducted a number of other experiments. Silverman and his doc teams, and they were replicated around the world. And with this one message, which he was delivering visually, by the way, through a light flash machine, he was able to do everything from increase dark throwing ability to replace schizophrenic pathology. I had a problem, not with the outcome of this message, because it was good, solid science, but with the theory behind that message. I cannot believe that there are that many Freudian believers or Freudian practices of the Oedipus complex. That there are that many of us out there in the world that truly have a schizophrenic tendency due to our inability to have sex with our parents, or even opposite sex. Nevertheless, this was the only message I could find in the literature that consistently worked. So what would I do? My lie detection scenario. So Mommy and I are one. Is that going to make the bad guy tell me the truth? I didn't think so. But it began to stumble around with it and think about it in terms of archetypes. Jung talks about a collective mind. And within this collective mind, there are archetypes. That is, we all know what a chair is. As an example, I'll use a platonic example. We all know what a chair is. Sometimes they have 4 legs, sometimes they have 1. Sometimes they have arms, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you sit in them, sometimes you don't. Sometimes they rock, sometimes they recline, sometimes they're comfortable, sometimes they're uncomfortable, and hell, probably every chair that's been made hasn't yet been made. But when we see it, we'll recognize the chair. So there must be some form of chair-ness that enables us to recognize the chair. The chairs you were sitting on are different than the chairs in your home, that are different than chairs in my home, and so forth, and yet every time I see a chair, I know it's a chair. Well, this archetype is referred to as chair-ness from the Platonic dialogue. Okay? Well, if you were correct, and there were archetypal messages, what would the modern archetype be? That's what I began to theorize. Let's assume that this isn't due to schizophrenic pathology at all. Let's assume that it's possible that this is due to some kind of archetypal communication. And the real tip-off to me about that was a study Lloyd himself ran, where he told his subjects the message on the page was Mommy and I are one. And it had no effect, no power. So it only worked when it was subliminal. So that, okay, I'll run a simple little study before I do anything. I will tell the people the message is Mommy and I are one. But I'll explain it to them differently than Lloyd did. What I'll suggest is, this is not your mom. I'm not talking about Mommy and I are one, me and my mommy one. What I'm talking about here is the archetype womb, the mother of all, the protector of all, that place where we're comfortable, we're secure, we're whole. So we'll use the message, Mommy and I are one, but I want you to understand that that's what that message means. Now when I told the subject, I wanted them to understand the message as having that intent. It's just as powerful as knowing what the message was and having it delivered subliminally, as it was when it was delivered subliminally without them knowing. Okay. I still didn't think that was going to cause people that intended to lie to me telling the truth. But, again, I didn't want to tell everybody you're going to drop dead if you don't tell me the truth. So what I decided to do was use, in a Western culture, what we see as a very powerful archetype. I put the 23rd Psalm on it. The Lord is my shepherd. He leadeth me beside still waters. That's all I put on the page, 23rd Psalm. And I ran a little study. People would come in. Normally, our intern to release time on live session test was 3 hours. 1 hour was just let them sit outside and get nervous and think about it. Then we had pre-test, test, and then secondary post-test. So while they were outside, they listened to the 23rd Psalm. Subliminally. When they came in, the only thing that was in the room was a sign behind me that said, "The truth shall set you free." That was it. What I found was my 20% inconclusives disappeared. I didn't have inconclusives anymore. That was marvelous. But there was a downside to this that I wasn't really fond of at the time. In interrogation, we know no one will give you a confession for the first 3 hours. Back. Okay? So do whatever you want to do. Stop, put them in a room, look dirty at them, etc. If you ever get arrested by law enforcement, by the way, or if there's law enforcement here, first 3 hours just hold you. That's just sweat you. Okay? You never get confessions in that first 3 hours. Well, that's good when you're a criminologist getting $150 an hour. You're drinking your coffee and kick back, and guys just sweating, wondering what you're going to ask. But I turn these charts around and say we have a little bit of a problem here. And the guy said, "I'll tell you the truth," and he confessed. I mean, literally. My confession rate soared to over 80%. There were times I felt like telling these folks, "Wait a minute, stop. Will you just hold it? I get paid by the hour." So I called a couple of examiner friends of mine in Utah and I said, I'm having this kind of effect with subliminal. And those were the days that when you said subliminal, they said, say what? I said, I'd like you to try this. You know, I created this. See if you replicate the findings. Well, they did, and they replicated the findings. They had the same kind of reported results. Well, that was enough at that point to convince me that this was a powerful tool if done correctly. So I went out to the Utah State Prison System, and I said to the warden and the social people, psych people there, you know, there's a new technology, it's called subliminal, and I've been using it in my criminology practice as well. And I just wonder if it might not assist in the inmate population in rehabilitating. The unfortunate thing about prison systems is they're typically just warehouse facilities. They don't rehabilitate. They don't deter. Indeed, they teach criminals how to be better criminals. After some ado, the prison system agreed. So we went over to the youth offenders facility, and we got ourselves 60 volunteers. We told them what we were going to do. We explained to them how we were going to do it. We asked them if they participated in the study. We gave them a little incentive, you know, a little more time out of themselves and do things like that. But they knew exactly what the study was going to be. It was totally informed consent. And they volunteered. We ran extensive pre and post psychometric tests. We used what in the States is called the Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory, the MMPI. We looked at these inmates for a common denominator. If we were going to use a program in the prison system, what would that program be? That is, what would we tell them? What would be the common denominator underlying criminality? What we found out of the MMPI was two things that popped up consistently. High scores of self-alienation and social alienation. And we started a little bit, or I started a little bit by saying it doesn't matter whether you're rich and on the road, you've got a big car, or you're in the prison system. That self-esteem issue is the core of everything we experience in life. And before we stream today, I hope you understand that it's the core of a lot of things we experience that we blame on physical issues. It's the core of many diseases, physical diseases. But all right, if those were the two issues, we decided that what we would do is create some languaging specific to those two issues. Once again, what is it that I'll put on a page? How will I say it? What is it that's necessary to increase self-esteem? At that point in time, we started doing something called profiling. We got all the inmates to participate, and we asked them to tell us the kinds of thoughts they had normally going through their mind. And then we asked them to tell us the kinds of thoughts that they would like to have going through their mind. And from that, together with what was in the literature, we created a set of affirmations. We ran our first study. Well, the results of the study were overwhelming. Today, it is a part and parcel of a number of prisons in the United States. Subliminal audio properties are used by their social workers. But what we discovered in the process was sometimes you can create statements that you intend to be a positive statement, that indeed is not a positive statement. Something else that we discovered in the process was what we were really doing with a subliminal message was bypassing critical awareness, defense mechanism. And the way we discovered that was the number of subjects who reported waking and thinking and speaking the words that were on the page. It was a very long script, so it wasn't probable they were memorizing. But let me deal with that in two parts before we go to break. The first part is, how can we create a message that appears to be positive and then indeed is not positive? Well, one such example we could developed from a model of someone who desires to reduce the amount of cigarettes they consume. We see hypnosis used a lot in America for weight control and smoking cessation. And one of the messages that we watched happen was a message that said, I find 30 cigarettes more than enough for me. Now the idea behind this message was it was put together for someone that was smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day who wanted to cut that cigarette consumption in half. So this affirmation was given this person so that this person could reduce his cigarette consumption by 50%. This would be the kind of thing you put in subliminal things. This would be the kind of thing you do in hypnosis. This would be the kind of thing you do at the poverty state. Right? That's the model scenario. What we find is that the mind does something called subconscious cerebration. Kind of works like a dice tumbler. The right hemisphere, and we'll discuss this in greater detail later, handles information differently than the left hemisphere. But because it does, it tumbles words in a disjointed way. If I looked at a statement like this and I realized it could be reorganized by the mind, reconnected in interesting ways, I might see that it says, I find more than 30 cigarettes enough for me. And guess what? That's how it works. This guy's smoking 3 packs, smoking 4 packs. Right? Despite our success at the Utah State Prison, we saw some of these kinds of things begin to emerge. Let's give you another example. My undergraduate alma mater, Weaver State College in Ogden, Utah, had a miserable football team. And it was a joke. I think the only reason funding wasn't withdrawn entirely from the football team is it would have been, that meant we'd have had to withdraw from the basketball team and track team and so on and so forth. And we had good athletics, except in football. Football was terrible. We never had a winning season. One of my embarrassments sometimes when I talk about Weaver was, I hope nobody knew about their football record. Well, one day we got a new coach at Weaver State, and I was off doing my thing, but he had read some of my book, and so he called me on the phone and he said, listen, I understand you went to Weaver State, and you know how good our football team is. Do you think maybe this technology would assist the football team? Well, I don't know, I hadn't thought about that. That's a good idea. Maybe we could devise some kind of a program to do that. So after several hours of meeting, we came up with some programs. Well, we made observations about Weaver State. It was, they get behind right in the very beginning, and as soon as they got behind, it was over with. They just quit. So if the score was 14-0 at halftime, it was 17-0 at the end of the game. Right? Well, we have to put some good, powerful messages in here, and we'll tell them they'll come from behind to win the game. Another problem was injury. Well, Weaver's players were typically a lot smaller than the rest of the league. And so injury had been locked off or placed off as, well, what do you expect when a 200-pound center is getting hammered by a 320-pounder? So we had to put some affirmations on having to do with playing relaxed and so on and so forth. Well, to make a long story short, we used this program the first year in 1987. In 1987, Weaver State was the Big Sky Championship. That was impossible. That was literally impossible. Then, undefeated. Much to my chagrin and to Mike Price's aging process was the fact that they were always behind at halftime. Well, we had a message on there. I play from behind. I come from behind to win. Were we programming these people to get behind so that they could come ahead? I tend to think so, because it didn't matter who they played or at what stage, they were always behind at halftime. We learned something else about the process of how language when internalized from a subliminal property becomes my own, therefore becomes my own belief, therefore becomes my own expectation. So I look at pictures that's on the board, and instead of seeing a happy smiling face, I see the witch. Or instead of seeing the witch, I see the happy smiling face. What predisposes me to see whichever image I see is what's going on in my head. And the only way I understand what's going on in my head, or you understand, is when we articulate it lexically. And as soon as we do that, we begin to define it, and that causes it to take form or shape. So there were two things that I came to a quick conclusion on. The first one was, look, if you hide the message so damn well that it's not there, it's not there. It's not a subliminal. A subliminal message, a subliminal stimuli is a message that you fail to report as being present. So Zola did the first experiments on subliminal in the mid-1800s. And what he did was present a pure tone. The presentation of this pure tone was slowly turned down until he reached what he called a threshold. It was a place where the individual reported the presence of the tone 50% of the time. It was there all the time, but they only reported it as being present 50% of the time. From that threshold where he coined the word subliminal, liminal information below the threshold of awareness. So in order for there to be a subliminal stimulus, it must really be there. It is there. It's just a matter that you don't perceive it as being there or report it as being there any more than the hundreds of thousands of people who have purchased my book, Subliminal Communication, report sex all over the cover. But I had an artist embed it with sex, and then I gave him a sheet inside to show him where the sex was. Once you see it, you cannot not see it. But until you see it, it doesn't exist. It's simply not there. Well, the subliminal stimulus must really be there. And we can also pretty much conclude that reality is basically built on what we believe it to be. If it's the witch, it's because something's going on in me that has me looking for that in reality. If it's a beautiful young maiden, something's going on me that has me looking at that reality. What we believe to be true is what we perceive. Perceptual defense mechanisms are such that you don't see sex on the cover of my book because it's not appropriate. It's out of context. The perceptual defense mechanism stops us from seeing. What we perceive is what we look for or expect. In other words, look, I go out into the world, and the only thing I'm going to see is what I expect to see. In America, we have a saying, TGIF, thank God it's Friday. Maybe you have a saying, something years after, which, you know, is one of those popular kinds of sayings everybody uses. It is basically predisposing me to expect that the week sucks. When it's over with, then I can have fun. How do you think that influences the way I interact in my workplace? Or how I respond to new stimulus that comes into my workplace? If I go out into the world saying, this is a terrible day, it's going to treat me terrible, that's exactly what I'm going to get out of it. What we look for is what we know. Look, if you saw a witch, and I didn't point out to you the if there was also a pretty maiden there, you would have only seen a witch. And you would be willing to fight over the fact that you saw a witch. What you see then, what you look for, is the only thing you know. What we know is what we believe to be true. Is it not? What we believe to be true is what we believe to be real. In other words, reality is based on what we believe to be true. And if it's outside of our possibility for it to be true, well, it couldn't be true, and therefore it's unreal. Is it not? And what we believe to be true that is reality comes back and is what we believe to be true. The whole process is in the head, completely circular. Well, if we look at the world, we look at the human condition, and we say, reality is built on our expectations. Perception is a function of what we believe. And that's just a given, that is a fact. I hope I made that clear to you. Then I suppose the information that's in here is going to predispose my behavior. In other words, I'm going to act according to the choices that they always say, I caught a cold. What is it that they're doing? How is it that they're talking to me? Before we go to break, let me read an example that I hope will make this point more clear. These two points what I'm trying to do. Okay. Tell a little story in the United States that goes to the point of making choices. Choices, of course, are based upon what I believe to be true about the reality that I live in, right? And that's circularity. And choices, of course, are what our behavior is all about. So the story goes like this. I'm in Manhattan, New York, walk down sidewalk, 53rd Street, very posh area, luxury condominium, high rise. A flower pot falls off the third balcony, hits me on the head. I've got some choices. I can throw myself down on the street. I mean, after all, it's a rich community, probably Jewish bankers live on that third floor, I'm going to make a lot of money, concussion, anything else that I can come up with, right, Thomas? Well, let's see, I could go up to the third floor, have a talk with this guy, couldn't I? There's a lot of that in the world, isn't there? I get even with him, I'm going to knock on his door and let him have his flower pot, guess where? Right? You could do that too, couldn't you? Well, let's see, what else could I do? Today we have a lot of people who are into a special form of metaphysics. To me, metaphysics is about Aristotle, who coined the word. Aristotle and Aristotelian metaphysics is a metaphysical science. And Albert Einstein said if he had his life to live over again, he would be a metaphysicist, not a physicist, but that's science. It's a marriage of the left and the right. But we have a lot of people in America who do what we call New Agey metaphysics. So to them, the right thing to do is to accept that the flower pot was supposed to fall on their head. After all, they give them some special enlightenment, right? Oh, so they'll just carry on like everything is wonderful, it's bliss, there's no problem. It was supposed to happen. Well, there's at least three choices. Maybe each of you can take just a second now and think of what you would do, or if there's a fourth choice. I'll give you a pragmatic choice, and maybe outside of the choices that are running around in your head, but it is the best choice you could make for yourself, for the flower pot, for the people upstairs who set it too close to the edge for it to fall off in the first place. If I decide to go upstairs and hit this guy in the mouth whose flower pot's on me, is it going to do me any good? No. I'm physically not going to feel any better. I'm going to fill myself with chemistry that is literally toxic to the human condition. Okay? And it's not going to do him any good. And I may find myself going to jail, being sued, and a number of other things too. Huh? If I pretend it didn't happen, is it going to do me any good? I don't think so. But I'll leave that to those that want to do that. If I face an injury to sue this person to get a lot of money through deception, do you think that's going to do me some good? Nah, if you don't have integrity in life, it's going to come catch you in the dark. I'll guarantee you that one. What if I were to take this flower, pick it up, walk down the street, find the floor, repot it, take the pot and the flower back, knock on the door, hand it to the person and say, your flower pot fell off the balcony, it hit me on the head, but here I repotted it. You probably ought to keep it in closer from the edge. Is that going to do me any good? Am I going to feel good inside? Is the chemistry inside me going to be good chemistry? Huh? Well, if that choice exists, why wouldn't I think of it first? With that, let's take a break, 10 minutes, and we'll come back and pick up. Thank you very much. Teach at a college level in 45 to 50-minute intervals. Everybody knows why, and that's simply because when you take up that position sitting down, after about 50 minutes, all the oxygen in the brain is in the butt. And we need to get up and kind of get it out and get it back up here. So, I think we've got most of the people back in. Let's go ahead and pick up with where we left. In order to do that, I'm going to digress somewhat on a tangent. And I want to discuss with you, to begin with, popular history and popular myths regarding subliminal communication. In America, although the work in subliminal goes back to the mid-1800s, the public really didn't become aware of it, understand it, have any real idea about it, until a fellow by the name of James Vickery, who owned some theaters in New Jersey, decided that he was going to use it to sell popcorn and Coca-Cola. So, according to Vickery, who also owned a company called Pre-Conscious Processing, he used some equipment that he developed and patented that would flash a visual image on a screen, and he flashed during the showing of the movie Picnic, with Kim Novak, the words, thirsty, drink Coca-Cola. Hungry, eat popcorn. And it reported that his concession sales went up 38%. And this was